Good morning to all of you. Speaking of the University of Tennessee, I have on my National Signing Day tie. We had the fourth best class, according to some people. So I'm glad to be here, Marv. Thank you for the invitation to talk about a subject I find fascinating and that I care a lot about. I'm here today to talk about something you wouldn't think you'd talk about at the Nuclear Institute. What would the United States be like without nuclear power? A day that I don't want to see in our country's future. That may seem like a distant and unlikely scenario, but in fact, it's a real threat to our economy and our way of life. According to a 2013 report by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, up to 25 of our 99 reactors could be closed by the year 2020. So I'd like to discuss this morning what difference that would make in the lives of everyday Americans. And this is best told by the story of other countries. But first, there's a few facts to consider. One, the United States uses about 25% of all the electricity in the world. It powers our industries, our computers, our homes, everything else we depend on. Number two, our 99 reactors provide about 20% of all of our electricity. This is electricity that doesn't turn off and on when the wind blows and the sun shines, and it's available 90% of the time. It's reliable, it's cheap, and it's safe. We've never had anyone die in a nuclear accident at any of our commercial reactors or on our naval fleet. Number three, at a time when many of the world's leading science academies and many Americans say climate change is a threat and that humans are a significant cause of that threat, nuclear power provides about 60% of the country's carbon-free electricity. Our Energy and Water Appropriations Subcommittee, which I chair, will take a year-long look at all of this during 2015. Our committee will begin with oversight, expanded budget hearings in February and in March, and then in April, we'll turn toward a series of hearings about the future of nuclear power in our country and what it would be like for the United States to be without it. Now, the best way to imagine what the United States would be without nuclear power is to look at the stories of three countries, Japan, Germany, and the United Arab Emirates. First is Japan, and the many lessons from the Fukushima nuclear accident in 2011. We know what the safety problem was. The utility ran out of water to cool the reactors. That was it. Perhaps the more important lesson is what it might look like for a country like ours. Japan is the largest economy, most like ours, to be without nuclear power. After Fukushima, Japan began shutting down its 48 reactors. Those reactors provided 30% of Japan's electricity. Things have changed in Japan, but not for the better as a result of that. The cost of generating electricity in Japan jumped 56% since they began shutting down their reactors in 2011. In June 2014, three major business organizations, the Japan Business Federation, Keidan-Dren, the Japan Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and the Japan Association of Corporate Executives, submitted a written proposal to the industry minister seeking an early restart of the nuclear reactors. The top priority, they said, in energy policy is a quick return to inexpensive and stable supplies of energy. This is especially important in an economy like ours, which depends on manufacturing for jobs. According to the World Nuclear Organization, a local mayor in Japan said that if Japan doesn't keep its reactors operating, quote, Japan's economy will wither. Our young people will move abroad, leaving the country with only grandpas and grandmas, unquote. A Wall Street Journal article said that Japanese have turned their air conditioners up to 82 degrees in order to cut back on electricity use, which would be fine, except that thousands of people have gone to the hospital with heat stroke. The emperor and empress have been wandering around the imperial palace with flashlights and candles because of the electricity problems. A second story is the story of Germany. I traveled there not long ago, and what I found was, to put it simply, an energy mess. Germany, until March 2011, obtained 1/4 of its electricity from nuclear energy using 17 reactors. Then the government decided to replace nuclear power with wind and solar as part of its expensive cap-and-trade policy, like the one proposed here in the past, a policy that deliberately raises the price of certain types of energy as a way of achieving clean energy independence. The cost of attempting to replace nuclear power with wind, solar, and accompanying infrastructure is estimated by the German government at $1.2 trillion US, and Germany is facing new problems that hinder its efforts to pursue clean energy. One problem is the subsidies for wind and solar are very high in order to encourage enough production. In a BBC News article, it asks this, quote, "Can Germany afford its energy bender shift to green power?" unquote. A minister for economics in Germany says that Germany's, quote, "law on renewable energy will not only lead to increased electric prices, but is also a non-market planned system that endangers the industrial base of the German economy." Another problem is Germany doesn't produce enough reliable baseload energy for an important manufacturing economy. So while closing its own nuclear reactors, Germany began buying nuclear power from France, bought more natural gas from a very unreliable partner, Russia, and in a remarkable turn of events for a country with a cap-and-trade policy, started building coal plants so it would have enough baseload electricity. So what's the result? One is that Germans have become energy dependent on countries like Russia. Germany's on track to get nearly 55% of its baseload electricity from other countries by 2020. Another is that the cost of electricity in Germany has skyrocketed. According to the Wall Street Journal, the average electricity prices for companies in Germany has jumped 60% over the past 5 years because of costs passed along as part of the government subsidies for renewable energy producers. Prices are now more than double those in the U.S., and Germany has become the highest household electric prices in the European Union. During my visit, when I asked an economic minister what he would say to a manufacturer concerned about energy costs in Germany, the minister said to me, "I would suggest he go somewhere else." The third story, finally, is the United Arab Emirates, which is a different kind of story. While Germany was closing its nuclear plants, the UAE was building nuclear plants just 12 years after notifying the International Atomic Energy Agency of its intent to install nuclear power. The Emirates will have completed 4 reactors, which will provide nearly 25% of its annual electricity by 2020. This is a nearly 3.5 times faster increase in emission-free green power than Germany has accomplished with wind and solar. So what does the United States need to do? Well, what would it take to avoid the path of Germany and Japan? Number one, build more reactors. A few years ago, I proposed that we build 100 new nuclear reactors. Even some of the nuclear industry thought that was not realistic, might be excessive, but maybe not. With the Center for Strategic and International Studies saying that we might have 25 of our 99 reactors closed by the year 2020. Add to this the problem with aging reactors that someday will have to be closed after 60 or 80 years. And then there is the projection from the U.S. Energy Information Administration that about 20% of our current capacity from coal is scheduled to go offline by 2020. If that coal were replaced entirely by nuclear power, it would require building another 48 new 1,250 megawatt reactors, which, by the way, would reduce our carbon emissions from electricity by another 14%. Now, it won't be replaced all by nuclear power. It'll probably mostly be replaced by natural gas. But you could see quickly that the number of new megawatts that our country needs from nuclear power over the next decades adds up pretty quickly. Number two, solve the nuclear waste stalemate. There's renewed hope under our Republican majority that we can solve the 25-year-old stalemate on what to do with waste from our reactors, and Yucca Mountain can and should be part of the problem, part of the solution. just last week, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission completed its safety evaluation report. It said that Yucca met all of the safety requirements for, quote, individual protection, human intrusion, and protection of groundwater through the period of geologic stability, unquote. The NRC and the Environmental Protection Agency defined the period of geologic stability as 1 million years. To continue to oppose Yucca Mountain because of radiation concerns is to ignore science as well as the law. Later this year, I plan to again introduce bipartisan legislation that would create both temporary and permanent storage sites in addition to Yucca Mountain for nuclear waste by making local communities, states, and the federal government equal partners in the process. We still need these sites, even after Yucca Mountain is open, because our existing nuclear waste, which is safely stored at reactors around the country, would more than fill up Yucca Mountain. Number 3, relieve the burdens of excessive regulation. We want nuclear power to be safe, but we want to make sure it's not, we don't want to make it so hard and expensive to build and operate reactors that you can't do it. We should be re-examining regulation of the nuclear reactor licensing process to make sure it's not an undue burden. This year, our subcommittee will hold an additional hearing to discuss the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's budget and conduct some much-needed oversight. Number 4, stop picking winners and losers. We need to end policies that pick winners and losers in the marketplace, certainly over the long term. The most conspicuous example of which is the wasteful wind production tax credit, which has now been in place for 22 years. Extending this wasteful wind subsidy for 1 year cost taxpayers $6 billion. The subsidy for big wind is so generous that in some markets, wind producers can literally give away their electricity and still make a profit. This phenomenon is called negative pricing, and it has the effect of making nuclear and coal plants less competitive and more likely to close. Sometimes the Obama administration's national energy policy seems like a national windmill policy, but that's not a sound plan for America's future. Even after 22 years and billions of dollars of subsidy, wind only produces 4% of our electricity in the United States, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, and that's when the wind blows. It would take a line of windmills stretching the length of the Appalachian Trail from Georgia to Maine to replace just 8 nuclear reactors, and you'd still need the reactors or gas or coal when the wind doesn't blow. And until there's some way to store wind power, which can only be produced, of course, when the wind's blowing, often at times when we don't need it, it'd be dangerous for a country our size to rely on wind. Relying on wind when nuclear plants are available is the equivalent of going to war in sailboats when nuclear ships are available. Number 5, double energy research. One of the biggest challenges is the need to increase government-sponsored research. It's hard to think of an important technological advance since World War II that has not involved at least some government-sponsored research, which is why I've proposed to double it. Take, for example, our latest energy boom, natural gas. The development of unconventional gas was enabled in part by 3D mapping from Sandia Laboratory and by the Department of Energy's large-scale demonstration project, then our free enterprise system, and our unique tradition of private ownership of mineral rights capitalized on that. Another example is the work being done on small reactors, which would allow nuclear power to be produced without as high of capital investment and to be accessible in most places, in more places. Number 6, encourage energy diversity. Historically, natural gas prices have a way of going up and then going down, sometimes abruptly. And experienced utility managers generally prefer more than one way of producing reliable, broad-based power. This is yet another reason why we need nuclear energy to be a major part of how we power our 21st century economy. That's why I wanted to come here today, to talk about the fact that a United States without nuclear power, or with very little nuclear power, is a very real possibility. It's a possibility we should not want if we want a strong country and a strong economy. I think it's a great advantage to those of us in the Tennessee Valley Authority region that TVA completed the last nuclear reactor of the last century and is completing the first nuclear reactor of this century, and is headed toward a situation where 40% of the electricity in our region will be produced by nuclear power. That means our power and electricity will be reliable, it'll be cheaper, it'll be cleaner, and if it's cleaner, that helps us breathe cleaner air. It helps us recruit industry to metropolitan areas which have a clean air problem, and it makes it possible for us to see the Great Smoky Mountains, which we like to do. So we need to prepare now by building more reactors, ending the stalemate on what to do about nuclear waste, stopping Washington from picking winners and losers in the marketplace, pushing back against excessive regulation, fueling more free market innovation with government-sponsored research, and encouraging energy diversity. If we do all these things, the United States will not see a day without nuclear power, and our energy future will be bright. Thank you.